Why loneliness feels different after 60. There is a kind of loneliness that does not arrive with noise. It does not break the door down. It does not announce itself with a dramatic moment. It does not even begin with tears. Sometimes it begins with something much smaller. A second cup that stays untouched. A phone that used to ring before dinner and now stays silent. A chair across the table that is still there, but no longer belongs to anyone. And somewhere after 60, that quiet starts to feel different. Not because older people are weaker, not because they suddenly forget how to be alone, and not because they need constant company. It feels different because by then, silence is no longer just silence. It carries memory. It carries routine. It carries names, voices, habits, holidays, and all the little moments that once made a life feel shared. That is why loneliness after 60 can feel heavier than it did at 30 or even 40. When you are younger, loneliness often feels temporary. You tell yourself, life is still moving. You believe new people will come. New chances will appear. New love, new work, new places, new beginnings. But later in life, loneliness often feels less like an empty room and more like a room full of echoes. Because by then, what hurts is not only the absence of people. What hurts is knowing exactly what used to be there. You remember what the house sounded like when someone called your name from another room. You remember how it felt when somebody noticed if you were late getting home. You remember the comfort of ordinary conversation, coffee in the morning, footsteps in the hallway, someone asking, "How did you sleep? Did you eat? Are you coming with me?" And one of the hardest truths about getting older is this. Sometimes loneliness is not the pain of being unloved. It is the pain of no longer feeling woven into the daily life of other people. That feeling can arrive slowly. It happens after retirement, when the calendar empties and nobody needs your opinion at 9 in the morning. It happens after children grow up, move away, build lives of their own, and start calling with love, but less often. It happens after a spouse dies, and sometimes even more quietly. It happens when a spouse is still there. But the marriage has cooled into two people sharing a house without truly sharing themselves. It happens when friends become busy
Goodbye, old
with
friend.
illness, caregiving, grandchildren, distance, or simply the exhaustion of their own lives. And sometimes it happens even when everything looks fine from the outside. That is what makes later life loneliness so difficult to explain. You can still be responsible, still be capable, still be independent, still cook your own meals, still drive your own car, still smile at the cashier, still say, "I'm doing okay." And yet, deep down, you may feel something painful and simple. Nobody really sees how alone I have become. That sentence is harder to say than most people realize, because many older adults were raised to stay strong, not to complain, not to burden others, not to talk too much about emotional pain, to be grateful, to carry on, to endure quietly. So instead of saying, "I feel lonely," they say things like, "I'm fine. I just stay home more now. I don't want to bother anyone. Everybody's busy." It is what it is. But the heart knows the truth, even when the mouth refuses to speak it. And over time, loneliness begins changing more than evenings and weekends. It changes the way a person moves through the world. Someone who has felt lonely for a long time most stop reaching out first, not because they do not care, but because silence starts to feel safer than disappointment. They stop calling. They stop inviting. They stop suggesting lunch. They stop asking if anyone wants to come by. They stop saying, "I miss you." Not because the need disappeared, but because unmet need
Emily,
becomes
just
embarrassing
thinking
after a
of you.
while.
That's
That is
sweet.
one of the cruelest parts of loneliness after 60. It is not only painful, it can also feel humiliating. You begin asking questions you never used to ask. If I call, will I be interrupting? If I invite them, will I sound needy? If I tell the truth, will I make them uncomfortable? If I disappeared for a week, who would notice first? And once those questions begin, even kind people can start retreating from life without fully realizing it. This is where loneliness becomes dangerous, not only because of how it feels emotionally, but because of what it slowly teaches a person to believe. It teaches them, you are no longer central. You are no longer needed. You are becoming forgettable. And when someone starts believing that, they do not just lose company. They begin losing energy, curiosity, motivation, tenderness, sometimes even hope. That is why loneliness in later life should never be treated like a small sadness. Because it is not small. It touches the body. It touches the mind. It touches sleep. It touches memory. It touches the way a person sees the future. And there is something else people often misunderstand. Loneliness is not always the same thing as being alone. A person can live alone and still feel peaceful. And another person can sit at a full dinner table and still feel deeply alone. That distinction matters because the answer is not simply putting more people around someone. The real answer is meaningful connection. And meaningful connection is much rarer than most people think. A crowded room does not cure loneliness if nobody in it feels safe enough to tell the truth to. A family group chat does not cure loneliness if every message stays on the surface. A marriage does not cure loneliness if two people stopped seeing each other years ago. A church pew, a lunch table, a holiday gathering, none of it guarantees belonging. What lonely people are often missing is not contact. It is resonance. It is the feeling that someone knows they are here, that someone notices the change in their voice, that someone remembers what month is hard for them, that someone asks a real question and waits for a real answer. That is why loneliness after 60 can feel so personal. By that age, people do not only want company, they want depth without performance. They want presence without pressure. They want a conversation where they do not have to pretend to be younger, lighter, stronger, or less tired than they really are. And there is another reason this stage of life can feel especially lonely. Many people lose not only relationships, they lose roles. For years, maybe decades, they were the provider, the parent, the caregiver, the organizer, the dependable one, the person everyone called, the one who held things together. Then life changes, retirement comes, children stop needing them in the same way, the body changes, friends move away, illness enters the picture. Driving at night becomes harder, energy becomes more precious, and suddenly the deeper question is no longer only, who is with me? The deeper question becomes, who am I now if fewer people need the version of me I used to be? That question sits quietly underneath many forms of later life loneliness. Because sometimes people are not only grieving a person, they are grieving a version of themselves. The wife who was always included, the husband who always had somewhere to go, the mother whose kitchen stayed full, the friend who got called first, the worker whose presence mattered every day. When those roles fade, loneliness can feel like identity loss. And identity loss is one of the deepest pains a human being can carry. But here is something important. Feeling lonely after 60 does not mean you failed at life. It does not mean your family does not love you. It does not mean you made all the wrong choices. And it does not mean you are weak. Sometimes it simply means you are human. In a season of life that has taken more from you than most people can see, sometimes it means your world became smaller, faster than your heart could adjust. Sometimes it means you were strong for so long that no one noticed when your strength stopped being enough. And sometimes it means you are carrying grief in forms that do not come with a funeral. The grief of being called less. The grief of being touched less. The grief of being included less. The grief of watching your old life slowly disappear into the distance. That grief deserves language. And even more than language, it deserves dignity. Because one of the most healing things a person can hear is this: your loneliness is not ridiculous. It is not dramatic. And it is not too late to respond to it.
To the best
not
pumpkin
magically,
spice latte
not
in
all
the
at
city.
once, not by
Cheers to that. It
pretending
really
you
is
can simply
wonderful.
think
We have to come
positive,
back next week.
but honestly, gently, deliberately. Sometimes healing begins with a very small act of re-entry, a phone call, a walk, a class, a neighbor, a volunteer hour, a place where someone might slowly begin to expect you again. That matters more than people think, because loneliness is often softened not by one grand moment, but by repeated contact, repeated warmth, repeated presence, repeated proof that your life still touches other lives. Sometimes healing begins with something as simple as deciding that every Tuesday morning you will go somewhere another human being might learn your name. Sometimes it begins when you admit to one trusted person, "I think I've been lonelier than I realized." Sometimes it begins by telling the truth to a doctor, instead of only talking about medication, blood pressure, or sleep. And sometimes healing begins with changing one private belief. From this, "No one needs me anymore," to this, "My life still matters even if its shape is changing." That is a sacred shift, because peace in later life is not built by denying loss. It is built by making room for life after loss. A smaller life can still be meaningful. A quieter life can still be connected. A changed life can still be deeply loved. But it usually requires courage, not loud courage, not the courage of performance, the quiet courage of reaching again, the courage to call first, the courage to answer the phone, the courage to show up somewhere even when you feel awkward, the courage to sit with people who do not know your whole story yet, the courage to believe that warmth can still return to an older life, because it can. Not always in the same form, not always from the same people, not always as quickly as you hope. But human connection is not reserved for the young. Belonging is not only for people with busy calendars. Tenderness is not only for early chapters. Meaning is not over at 60 or 70 or 80. And sometimes the deepest connections of life come later, when people are finally honest enough to stop pretending. So, if this season has felt quieter than you expected, if dinner feels longer, if evenings feel heavier, if the phone feels too silent, if the house sometimes feels like it is holding its breath, please hear this. You are not the only one. You are not strange for feeling this, and you are not too old to be found again by life. But life may not return loudly. Sometimes it returns through a neighbor, a walking group, a library event, a church basement, a community club.